Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an instructive game to share with you from 1969. On the white end, Boris Spassky playing against Tigran Petrosian. All right, this was from their World Championship match or rematch, Game 5 encounter here. On board, Queen's Gambit declines, and with C5, this is the Semi-Tarrasch. Now, with how this one plays out, we have a couple minor piece exchanges early on, knights exchanged, as well as the dark squared bishops. So this is really what we're looking at in this game. Majorities for each side. This is a nice example game for the side with the central majority. We're going to see how well Spassky interacts with his soon-to-be passed d-pawn. All right, let's get a few more developing moves in here. Comes b6. White's next two moves, the rooks end up central. Which rook would you move to these squares first? You going with the queen rook to d1 or the king rook to e1? There's not a great difference between the two when you look at the computer evaluation, but if you'd like to go ahead, pause the video, see which of these two you would play first. Okay, this is a bit of an advanced question and a little subtlety here. How white plays it, it's rook a to d1 first. Now, I believe what's a bit more precise is to go with rook f to e1, and a reason for this is to anticipate knight a5. And once that bishop is questioned, you'll note there's a new square available. Falling all the way back is maybe the way to go, staying out of the major pieces way. You don't have to drop back to d3 or e2 in this case. All right, how it's played in this one, rook a to d1, black doesn't question the bishop straight away, but if it is questioned, pick one of these two, you're getting in the way of the major pieces somewhat. Not a great difference in the eval, but just something to note there. It's bishop b7 in this game. Now rook f to e1, rook c8, and call it the halfway point of the game, move 15 here, d5. Now in the game, black resolves this tension straight away, and white recaptures with the bishop. If black plays in a different way, for instance, knight a5, leaves this tension for a moment or two, bishop goes all the way back home, stays out of the way of the majors, and let's say the tension is resolved at this point. I want to give you at least a feel for how you can continue here as white if black is blockading in the following way. Queen on d6, not the ideal blockader. The knight is the ideal blockader. But this is what you could angle for. Knight g5, knight e4 ideas to challenge that queen post. And there's also these little tricks, indirect defense of this pawn, rook e3 being the move, preparing to meet bishop captures pawn with a pin. That would be decisive for white. What would also be decisive is queen takes pawn, and yet again, rook d3 in that case, with a skewer. So that's a way forward for white if the tension is, let's say, not resolved straight away. It's resolved straight away in this game. Knight a5 only now. Queen f4, queen c7. In general, if you're the side here who's soon to have a passed center pawn, we're eventually going to get this capture. Pawn's going to recapture, and there you go. We got the passer. In general, you do well to keep the queens on if you're going to have that passed pawn. More tricks are going to be in your favor with the queen still on board, especially when the pawn gets all the way down to d7. We'll have a closer look at that soon enough. From here, we avoid the queen exchange. And also what's right around the corner for white is this idea of knight g5, threatening mate on h7. Now, how black plays it here, a bit of an error here. Bishop captures bishop is played. Now, what's considered best? Best from here is to play h6. And this cuts out the knight g5 idea, creates that flight square as well. Best play after h6 is knight e5, and this carries a serious threat of knight d7. best would be to exchange bishops here, but just to highlight this, the seriousness of knight d7, let's say a passing move, you start running with your majority. Look at what knight d7 is doing. Targeting the rook and also cutting the queen off from her defense of f7. There's going to be a big problem here on this square soon enough. Best play is the following play where the knights end up on these, I'd say, optimal posts. Calls this one around even. All right, how it's played here, black, in response to queen f5, captures on d5, and white simply recaptures, and we have that passed pawn on board, passed d pawn ready to roll. Another move white could have played here was knight g5. This would have been, another top move. What do you do about this mate threat? The knight and queen, when the queen in particular is striking h7 along a diagonal, you don't have a convenient response to the mate threat. A convenient response would be, let's say if the queen was targeting it along a file, convenient response would be h6. By playing h6, you're not creating any holes. But in this case, you would have to create a hole. You have to play g6, and then there you go. There's these two gaps that can be exploited by the queen or knight. Now, how the game might go from this point, something like this, eventually you have to flick in g6. f5 is certainly asking for trouble, a check, follow up, knight fork. So it might look something like this, super duper weakening, and g4 is a winning way from here. King position getting broken down. Tries like queen c4 or queen f4 pinning the pawn can both be met with rook e4. And let's say queen c2 here. This is a nice way to coordinate the pieces. Everything is cool from here, and h5 is ready to be broken down. So this was a way forward for white to not immediately recapture here on d5. You could go straight in for the mate threat. It's the recapture in this one. In comes queen c2. Queen is hit, a2 is hit, but we're keeping the queens on board. Back she goes. A pawn down for the count, but we have a wild d pawn that continues to roll as far as it can go. 3 passers. Black is up a pawn, has connected passers, but it's all about pawn quality here. And look at what this pawn is doing to the black rooks. What kind of options do the black rooks have? Just looking at legal moves between the white rooks and the black rooks, 16 options for the white rooks, 5 for black, and most of them are terrible. Rook b8, for instance. That's not working. Could take the rook and land a check, follow up, checkmate. Big mobility difference between the rooks. Where do we go from here? Well, it's queen to c4. Now, earlier I was saying in general you want to keep the queens on board. We still see this. Queen f5 is played here. What is a position you could kind of look to? Why might we want to keep the queens on board? Well, this pawn right here, if we could somehow, let's say, maneuver our queen in a way where she is stable on, let's say, c7 or e7, what would she be doing? She would be defending the pawn and applying pressure to whatever pieces they're blockading that pawn. And what's going to happen? The defending side is going to have to arrange the pieces in a way where that blockading piece is secure. So 2 pieces, in other words, would end up being restricted by one really active piece, a queen, again, for instance, on e7 or c7. That's an uncomfortable situation for the defending side, to have one aggressive piece restricting two of your pieces. The queens remain on board. Queen f5 it is. Now h6 is flicked in there. No knight g5 here. From here, rook c1, queen a6, rook activated on the 7th. In comes b5, some air for the queen to challenge the rook. Follow-up from here is knight to d7. This isn't considered top. What's considered top is this slick move rook to e8. So that's kind of flashy. What would you do in the case of rook to e8? Well, if you capture the rook, you're going to lose. Here's the path that would lead to checkmate. We're going to have queen takes f7, queen takes g7. So that is a trick that was available to white. Also, after rook e8 and let's say queen d6, what would white have here? Well, this pretty cool move, rook c8. Increasing the pressure on that 8th rank, really interacting well with that passed pawn. And now what do you do as black? You take the pawn, you're going to lose out rook takes rook on f8, and then queen takes queen. That's one way. Also know your back rank here as white is secure. Queen check, the knight can block. And now what? Still have an issue here on that d8 square. Taking either rook, we're just recapturing at the pawn, we're winning out. Winning material. There is an only move situation that's right around the corner potentially here for white. I want to touch on this. Suppose black tries to secure that promotion square. Here's how you can continue. Capture on d8. Queen no longer needed there to secure the rook on c8. She could transfer her attention now towards the other rook. Say you take me, I'm recapturing with the pawn. It may look a little scary right here for white after knight to e6. Targeting the queen, defending the rook, and also cutting the rook's defense of the knight. Black has a mate in one threat all of a sudden. White would have one winning move. Everything else white would be losing. That winning move, queen takes rook. That would save the day. Knight takes queen, we get that queen right back. If the king tries to make a run for it, well, he's not going to run for too long. This is one way forward, and it's pretty clear white is winning. Knight is secure, king is secure. And next up, queen e7 and promote, for instance. All right, how does it play out in this game? We do not see, pretty lengthy variation there, we do not see rook to e8. It is knight d4. And from here, queen b6 is played. The top line from here runs with queen d6, knight takes pawn, queen d2. It's calling this plus 1.4. White gets the material back. It's looking at king f1 from here. That was the best line. Now, how it plays out in this game, after knight d4, queen b6 is played. Rook c8 played now. And in the game, we see knight b7. Some more defense over that blockading square. There's a couple moves to touch on from here. One is queen captures knight, and two is g6, questioning the queen. What would happen if queen captures knight? Well, this is actually simple enough. We take on d8. And if it's recaptured, this is going to lead to checkmate. We got that square covered. What would be the story if black responded to rook c8 with g6? Only move situation now for white. Only move to win would be to capture here on d8. If you fall back here, trying to stay trained on the knight, as well as these 2 points here, the queen will be challenged with h5. She'll be kicked from that post on g4. This would be the winning way. In the event of g6, you capture on d8. And now what? Take the queen, take on d8 one way or the other. Let's touch on each briefly. If pawn takes queen, simple enough. We swipe the rook. Next up, rook check, and we get that queen right back. What about the captures here on d8? If queen takes rook, queen takes pawn is cool. Regaining the material, the knight feels a bit stranded, lacks a support point there on c4. White is doing well, winning still. And in the case of rook takes rook, we're dropping in here to e8 with check. Now what? King here, checkmate. Take here, that's of course not going to work out. Be mate soon enough. Have to step up here, and then there's a check. Now what? King there, queen corner pocket for mate. Pawn advance, queen e7 for mate. And queen f6. This too would also lead to mate. You could of course exchange queens and win the rook, but a flashy move here available to white with knight e6 check. This will lead to mate eventually. You go here, you're losing the queen, and next up queen g7 or h8 for mate. And if you take the knight, the 7th rank is now more vulnerable without that pawn around. White would have this check. King has to move. There is this pin here. King g8, we win the queen, and next up there will be queen g7 for mate. All right, how does it play out in this one? We do not see this g6 move. It's knight b7. In comes knight c6, knight d6, and Spassky simply captures the rook, gives up the queen, and drops back here to c6. And that's enough to force black's resignation. What are you supposed to do here as black? Right around the corner for white. Exchange rooks and promote. The knight is out of position to prevent the pawn from advancing. So with the best play, it's looking at f6, and from here, well, simple enough, exchange rooks, and there you go. We get that queen right back. And these two pawns are not scary enough, not far enough advanced to pose any serious threat to the rook. They'll eventually be rounded up. This is a completely winning position for white. So after knight c6 in this game, black resigns. Now, I said earlier, in general, you want to keep queens on board when you're working with that passed pawn, the central passed pawn in this case. And we're even seeing a case here where we might not even need our queen, as long as our other pieces are coordinated really well with that dangerous passed pawn. And white is certainly coordinated really well in this case. Anyhow, what are your thoughts on this one? Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.